Howdy, everyone. All right, well, you might have noticed right away that the propeller is now taken off of the airplane. So, since I'm done with the baffles, I'm done with the cowling, things like that, I don't need the propeller in place because everything's been fitted, everything's been made final. So, to free up a little bit more room in the shop and to get the propeller out of the way, I've went ahead and I removed it, and it is back down in the basement. Nothing else really new. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of stuff that's new. I just have to think about what it might be. One thing is you may notice the spark plug wires are now in place. I've got them held on with just simple Adele clamps, and I've got some plastic spacers here and there to keep the wires separated. I've got my tubes, my cooling tubes are now in place. Here are some more spark plug wires, again with the plastic spacers to try to keep some separation as best I can. The oil cooler, I think I've talked about that. That is now in with the lines connected. I'll come around here to the other side. I've got some RTV to do. I made myself a note here that once the propeller was removed, I need to get in here and do some RTV. I'll do that here shortly. I have my bypass, my cold air bypass for the inlet is in place. Again, instead of doing clamps directly off of the valve covers, I made these little extensions to bring the clamps lower so that the control cable for the alternate air source will be more in alignment with the way that I wanted this to actuate. And then off of those, obviously, I put some clamps for the spark plug wires. Here's another spacer. So those are done. Here's another inlet or a cooling duct. Those are finished, and I've also finally got around to finishing the exhaust. Now this was a little bit of a chore because, yet again, to get this fitted, you have to put the cowl on, take it off, put the cowl on, take it off, right? And you have to fool around with getting, this is a ball joint here. So from there back, that all swivels. This is a muffler. This muffler and tailpipe are all one unit. This is all welded together. So from this ball joint down, that's all a solid unit. But you have some adjustment on the ball joint, and of course, this heat shield is adjustable. You can slide it around the muffler and position it however you need it. However, I noticed that with the cowling in place, the bottom of the muffler, this is another muffler, and it's also my heat muff. You come around here to the other side, you can see that it's also a heat muff. So it's a muffler with a heat shield that goes completely around it with the ports for the heat muff. The other one is a muffler with just a partial heat shield. This heat shield just wraps around half of the muffler. Anyway, with my cowling in place, both of these were hitting right here. This muffler here and this muffler here were laying on the cowling. And it didn't matter how I moved this part around on the ball. This always pretty much stayed just touching the cowling. So I had to modify the header pipes. Now, I didn't want to go through the trouble of trying to figure out how to modify it, sending them back to the manufacturer, explain to them how to modify them, get them back, and hopefully there wasn't any miscommunication and they would actually be modified correctly. So rather than take that chance, I modified them myself. So what I had decided to do, these two pipes come down into this single pipe here. And basically, I just needed to take this ball joint and raise it up off of the cowling. So in order to do that, what I had done, I cut a wedge out of the pipe. So if you can imagine that, I just took and I made a straight cut, and then I made a diagonal cut, but I didn't cut it all the way through. I left the bottom, you can see here, there's no weld here. I left the bottom attached. So I just cut a wedge out of the top, and then I took the ball joint and I bent it up to close that gap. And then I had a coworker of mine re-weld it. So again, just cut a wedge, leave it attached at the bottom, cut the wedge, and then closed up the wedge and then welded it shut. And I had to do the same thing on the other side here. This one was a lot easier to work with just because there is a little bit more of a straight run before the cuts. But again, I just cut a wedge out of the top area. I left the bottom attached, probably about 3/4 of an inch or so I left attached, and then bent it up to close the gap and then had it re-welded. And that worked. That made the clearance here between the muffler and the cowling better. It's still not that great in my opinion. I've got probably about a 1/2 inch of clearance, maybe, here now between the muffler and the cowling. And just the way that the cowling is shaped and the way that these mufflers work out, I've got some tight clearances. They don't physically touch the cowling sitting here static, but I've only got, in some areas, I probably have like 3/8 of an inch of clearance at the most. Not entirely pleased with that, but that's just the way it is for now. I'll talk about the lower cowling later. That's going to get epoxied on the inside, just like I had epoxied the top cowling. And I'm also going to line it with some insulation. So that will help with the heat transfer. Again, this is a heat muff. So this one may not be quite as hot as the other side because this is going to have cooling air constantly pumped through it. So this may not be so bad. Don't forget that the muffler is underneath this. This is actually a heat shield. So the muffler is underneath this shield, and this particular shield, of course, gets cooled. So this one may not be too bad. This one over here, this one is just a muffler, and like I said, you can see the heat shield does not go all the way around. So the heat that's generated off of this is just going to radiate out. But again, the cowling is going to be insulated with a thermal barrier, so that may not be too bad. I'm mostly concerned about when the engine is started and shut down and during different phases of flight, it may torque around, and some of these different locations around here in the cowling, they may be some interference, but I'll have to deal with that once I start flying. On the back side here, you can see that I've got the tailpipes right behind the muffler are attached to the engine mount, and I know there are various opinions on doing that because, of course, the engine mount in theory is stationary and the engine moves. So it's not a good idea to permanently attach or to, not permanently, but what do I want to say? You know what I'm talking about. Instead of having the tailpipes connected solid to a fixture, you'd want to keep these attached only to the engine so that everything will move together. I see the logic behind that, but this exhaust came from Vetterman. And on his website, he has been attaching the tailpipes directly to the engine mount. So I have done that. However, I've left them a little bit, not loose, but there is some movement available in here. This is free to pivot along this bolt. This bolt is tight, but there's a pretty good lever arm here. And if this wants to pivot on this bolt, it will. Same thing with this bolt. There's quite a lever here. If this lever wants to pivot around this bolt, it will. You can see that this particular Adele clamp is not completely tight around the support. The next size smaller clamp was too tight. This clamp is maybe a little too big, but it is on here secure. This will not slide back and forth. And then I've got them attached with the standard stainless steel tubes inside of a rubber tube, a rubber hose. And that just connects from the left side to the right side. what I had done with these, there is talk about the metal tubes will slide around inside this rubber tube, regardless of how tight you clamp it. So what I had done, I don't know if you can see, there's a bulge here and a bulge here. I flared the tubes just a little bit on the end, and then jammed the tube up over top of the flare, and then just behind the flare is where I did my clamp. So now this tube cannot pull out. This tube cannot pull out. Now in theory, I could push this tube inward, but I doubt that's going to happen just because of the way that the flare is formed. It's going to resist the tube sliding further onto the stainless. Again, all theory. That's all going to get proven once the engine is running and the plane is up and flying. If I have issues, of course, I'll deal with it at that time. I elected to have this heat shield positioned in a way that it will help protect my cable. You can see the distance between the heat shield and the cable is minimal. There is an air gap there, but it's minimal. And of course, this is static. When the engine's running and things start torquing around, those may touch. But I'm going to see how that goes initially. I keep a close eye on all of these clearances. If I need to, I can reposition the cable. I could potentially wrap it with something to help protect it. So for now, I'm going to call the exhaust finish. And like I said, I will deal with issues that may or may not come on down the road at that time. So I've got a couple of EGT probes to reconnect. I had to disconnect everything to take out the exhaust and cut it and re-weld it. So I'm going to reconnect my EGT probes, and I'm going to do my RTV work that needs to be done. And then I think I will coat the inside of the bottom cowling with epoxy like I had done the top cowling. Once that is good and dry, I'm going to go ahead and lay in my my reflective heat barrier stuff in the bottom of that. And then I think at that point I might go back to my gear leg fairings, wheel pants. Long story short, wasn't happy with the way that the wheel pants turned out. I wasn't entirely happy with the way the gear leg fairings had turned out. And I know that I want the capability to do some non-paved landings. I want to be able to fly in and out of some airports that are not hard paved. So I would like a little bit more ground clearance, so to speak, and things of that nature. Anyway, I found a place. So now I've bought bigger wheels, bigger tires, bigger brakes, and aftermarket wheel pants and leg fairings. So that might be the next big project that I tackle after I have this little stuff that I just talked about wrapped up. So I'm going to try to get some of these loose ends done, and if I do the gear legs, wheels, and brakes, of course I'll videotape all that. And if I move on to something else, I don't know what that would be at this time, but as always, whatever I get into next, you guys will know about it because I'll make some videos. Alrighty. So that's it for now. As always, thanks for stopping in. I appreciate it. I appreciate the comments. And thanks for subscribing, and thanks for continuing to stop in and check out my videos. I do appreciate it. All right. I will talk to you guys later.